The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with tension as Ambassador Veltar's serpentine form coiled around the speaker's podium. His scales shifted from deep purple to angry crimson as he addressed the assembled delegates from 47 different species. "The situation on Dracaris Prime has become impossible," he hissed, his forked tongue tasting the recycled air. 3 expeditions have failed. The Korthak warriors, renowned throughout the galaxy for their battle prowess, returned with only half their number. The Xanthorian war machines, those mechanical monstrosities that conquered 12 systems, were found as twisted metal scattered across the crystal plains. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The crystalline Ilari chimed in harmonious discord, while the gaseous nebulans swirled in agitated patterns within their containment suits. At the back of the chamber, a single human representative sat quietly, taking notes on a primitive paper tablet. "The Dragon Graveyard holds the key to stopping the Void Plague," continued Veltar. "Without the ancient dragon cores buried there, our worlds will fall one by one to that consuming darkness. Yet every attempt to retrieve them has ended in death or worse." Elder Quinlos of the Ethereal Collective materialized at his seat, his translucent form shimmering with concern. "The dragons of Dracaris Prime were the first victims of the Void Plague, but their death throes created an electromagnetic storm that has raged for 3 standard years. No technology can function within 50 kilometers of the graveyard. The very air burns with residual psychic energy from their final screams." The human representative, Captain Maya Chen, raised her hand. She was young by human standards, perhaps 25 Earth years, with short black hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths the other species couldn't quite fathom. Her simple blue uniform marked her as part of humanity's small diplomatic corps. "Permission to speak, elders?" Veltar's head swiveled toward her, and his laugh was like grinding metal. "The human wishes to contribute? How amusing. Your species has been part of the Galactic Federation for barely 50 years. You have no colonies beyond your small solar system, no great technologies, no enhanced biology. What could you possibly offer?" Maya stood, her movements economical and purposeful. "My species offers something the galaxy seems to have forgotten: adaptability without technology. We can survive where your enhanced warriors and advanced machines cannot." "Preposterous," snorted General Farquhar, his rocky granite clan hide scraping against his chair. "Humans are fragile creatures. You have no natural armor, no energy projection capabilities, no psychic resistance. The electromagnetic storms alone would cook your primitive nervous system." "Perhaps," Maya replied calmly. "But we've survived on a death world for millions of years without any of those advantages. We learned to read weather patterns by watching clouds, to navigate by stars, to hunt creatures 10 times our size with nothing but sharp sticks and persistence. We developed our minds to be flexible because we couldn't rely on any single adaptation." The chamber erupted in derisive sounds from multiple species. The Veltorians whistled mockingly, while the Zephyrians clicked their mandibles in what their translators rendered as laughter. Ambassador Veltar raised a clawed hand for silence. "Even if we accepted this ridiculous proposition, what makes you think a single human could succeed where entire armies have failed?" Maya's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes that made several of the more perceptive species lean forward with interest. "Because armies try to fight the environment. Humans learn to work with it. And because sometimes the smallest key opens the largest door." Elder Quinlos materialized more solidly, his form taking on an almost physical presence. "The child speaks strangely. There is something in her words that resonates with the deeper currents of reality. Perhaps we should listen." "Listen to what?" Veltar's voice rose to a near shriek. "She offers nothing but primitive philosophy. The Dragon Graveyard requires power, advanced technology, weapons capable of cleaving through the very fabric of spacetime. It does not require platitudes about clouds and stars." But High Admiral Zextheri of the Void Fleet was studying Maya with all 6 of her compound eyes. The insectoid commander had led successful campaigns against threats that had consumed entire star systems. Her tactical mind was legendary throughout the galaxy. "Captain Chen," she clicked through her translator, "explain your proposal in detail." Maya nodded respectfully. "The electromagnetic storms make all advanced technology useless. But they don't affect organic compounds, natural materials, or simple mechanical devices. While your forces tried to power through with energy shields and plasma weapons, a human could enter on foot with basic tools. The psychic screams of dying dragons would drive any sentient being insane, objected Dr. Heimdall of the Psychic Research Division. His enlarged cranium pulsed with bioluminescent patterns as he spoke. The mental anguish stored in that place would overwhelm any consciousness. Human minds are different, Maya replied. We're naturally resistant to psychic intrusion because our thoughts are chaotic, contradictory, and layered. We think on multiple levels simultaneously. A focused psychic attack might slip through the chaos without finding a solid target to grab onto. Several delegates exchanged glances. It was true that humans were notoriously difficult to read telepathically, but most species attributed that to their primitive mental development. General Thockwar leaned forward, his massive stone bulk groaning against the reinforced chair. Even granting all of that, which I do not, how would one fragile human carry dragon cores weighing several tons each? These artifacts are the size of small buildings. Maya smiled for the first time during the discussion. It was a small expression, but it carried something that made the temperature in the chamber seem to drop several degrees. That assumes I'd need to carry them out myself. Dragons were intelligent creatures, weren't they? They had their own reasons for gathering in that particular location. Maybe they weren't just dying there. Maybe they were preparing something. The chamber fell silent. Elder Quinlos began to solidify further, his form taking on an almost crystalline appearance that hadn't been seen in centuries. The human speaks of things that touch the edge of the deeper mysteries. How do you know of such possibilities? I don't know, Maya admitted. But my species has always been good at recognizing patterns others miss. Sometimes the most important clues are the ones everyone else overlooks because they seem too simple or too strange. Ambassador Veltar was practically vibrating with frustration. This is madness. We would be sending a primitive creature to her certain death on the basis of vague intuitions and philosophical riddles. The Galactic Council has responsibilities. We cannot indulge in such fantasies when entire worlds hang in the balance. The alternatives have all failed, pointed out Admiral Zextheri. Our conventional approaches have cost hundreds of lives and achieved nothing. Perhaps it is time to try an unconventional one. Elder Quinlos spoke, and his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond the merely physical. There are currents in the deep that suggest possibilities. The child's words align with patterns that have been forming at the edge of perception. I believe we should allow this attempt. The debate raged for hours. Military commanders argued about the waste of resources. Scientists questioned the theoretical basis of Maya's approach. Diplomats worried about the political implications of failure. But, gradually, a consensus began to emerge. It wasn't that the Galactic Council believed Maya would succeed. Most of them were convinced she would die within hours of entering the Dragon Graveyard, just another casualty in their desperate war against the Void Plague. But they had run out of conventional options, and sometimes desperation opened doors that logic kept locked. The final vote was close, 24 in favor, 23 opposed. Maya Chen would be given a chance to attempt what the greatest warriors and most advanced technologies in the galaxy had failed to accomplish. As the session ended and delegates began filing out, Admiral Zextheri approached the human representative. Her compound eyes fixed on Maya with an intensity that would have been uncomfortable if not for the genuine concern behind it. Captain Chen, she clicked softly, I voted in favor of your proposal, but I need you to understand something. The Dragon Graveyard is not simply dangerous. It is a place where reality itself has been wounded. The expedition leaders we've sent haven't just died. Some have returned as something else entirely, speaking in languages that predate known civilization. Others have vanished completely, as if they never existed at all. Maya nodded gravely. I appreciate the warning, Admiral. But I think that's exactly why a human might have a chance. We're used to living with uncertainty, to adapting to situations that don't make sense. Our ancestors survived ice ages, plagues, and predators by being too stubborn to give up and too flexible to break. Stubborn and flexible, mused the Admiral. An interesting combination. I hope it proves sufficient. She paused, her mandibles clicking in what the translator rendered as concern. Is there anything we can provide to assist you? Any equipment that might help? Actually, yes, Maya replied. I'll need access to your historical archives, particularly anything related to dragon behavior and the initial spread of the Void Plague. And I'd like to speak with the survivors of the previous expeditions, if any are willing. The Admiral's eyes brightened with what might have been approval. A warrior who gathers intelligence before battle. Perhaps you are not as primitive as the others believe. I will arrange both requests immediately. As Maya left the council chamber, she could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching her departure. Some looked at her with pity, some with curiosity, and a few with something that might have been hope. She understood their skepticism. By any rational measure, her chances of success were minimal. But Maya-chan had grown up on stories of human explorers who had ventured into impossible places armed with nothing but determination and improvised solutions. She thought of Antarctic expeditions that had survived months in temperatures that should have killed them, of sailors who had crossed unknown oceans guided only by wind patterns and star positions, of ordinary people who had somehow found ways to thrive in environments that seemed designed to destroy them. The galaxy had forgotten that intelligence wasn't just about processing power or psychic abilities. Sometimes it was about recognizing that the rules everyone else followed might not be the only rules available. Sometimes it was about being willing to fail in creative ways rather than succeed through conventional methods. As she walked through the space station's corridors toward the archives, Maya began to formulate a plan that would have seemed insane to any rational observer. It involved principles of organic chemistry, predator-prey relationships, and a half-remembered story her grandmother had told her about befriending wild horses on the plains of Mongolia. It was exactly the kind of plan that only a human would consider attempting. Which was exactly why it might actually work. The dragon graveyard awaited, and, with it, the first real test of whether humanity's greatest strength was their technology or their willingness to abandon it when necessary. Maya-chan was about to find out which answer would save the galaxy. Maya spent 3 days in the archives, and each revelation made her planned approach seem both more necessary and more dangerous. The historical records painted a picture of the dragons of Dracarys Prime that contradicted almost everything the galaxy believed about them. They weren't just large predators, she murmured to herself as she scrolled through xenobiology reports that were over 2 centuries old. They were ecosystem engineers. They actively shaped their environment to support other life forms. The archival footage showed massive creatures with crystalline scales that could channel energy in ways that defied several physical laws. But, more importantly, it showed them working in cooperation with dozens of other species, creating elaborate structures that seemed to blend technology with biology in ways that no current galactic civilization could replicate. Dr. Yenna Solis, the human xenobiologist who had studied the dragons before their extinction, had left detailed notes that the other species had apparently overlooked or dismissed. Her observations were filled with insights that could only have come from someone who understood social cooperation rather than simple dominance hierarchies. Dragons didn't conquer territory, Maya read aloud from Solis's final report. They cultivated it. Each graveyard wasn't a place they went to die, but a place they went to transform. The electromagnetic storms aren't random energy discharges. They're structured. Purposeful. The dragons were trying to build something with their deaths. A soft chime indicated someone had requested entry to her study chamber. Admiral Zextheri emerged from the transport tube, followed by a figure Maya didn't immediately recognize. The newcomer appeared to be wearing some kind of environmental suit, but closer inspection revealed that the suit was actually part of their body. Cybernetic implants covered most of their visible skin, and their eyes had been replaced with advanced sensor arrays. Captain Chen, clicked the Admiral, I'd like you to meet Commander Rask. They're the only survivor of the last expedition to return with their sanity intact. Commander Rask's voice came from speakers mounted in their throat, their original vocal cords apparently among the casualties of their experience. I volunteered for full cybernetic conversion before the mission. Thought it would protect me from the psychic effects. I was wrong. Maya stood and offered a respectful greeting. I'd appreciate hearing about what you encountered, Commander. The storms start 50 kilometers out, Rask began without preamble. But they're not like any electromagnetic phenomenon in our databases. They respond to thought. The more complex your cognitive processes, the more aggressively they attack. My enhanced processing centers were offline within minutes. I had to rely on basic biological functions just to remain conscious. What did you see at the graveyard itself? Rask was quiet for a long moment, their sensor arrays dimming as if they were accessing painful memories. It wasn't a graveyard. That's what we got wrong. It was a nursery. Maya and the Admiral exchanged glances. This was the first time anyone had described the site in those terms. Explain, the Admiral requested. The dragon cores aren't just power sources. They're eggs. Chrysalises. Something in between. The dragons didn't die there. They transformed into something we don't have words for. And they're still there, in a state that exists partially outside our reality. Maya felt a chill run down her spine, but it wasn't entirely from fear. There was something familiar about the pattern Rask was describing. Commander, did the dragons respond to your presence? They tried to communicate, Rask admitted. But not in any language or telepathic format we understand. They communicate through manipulation of fundamental forces. Gravity, electromagnetism, quantum interactions. My cybernetic systems interpreted it as chaos, but there was structure there. Intent. What kind of intent? Warning. They're trying to warn us about something. The void plague isn't separate from them. It's connected. Maybe they're trying to create something that can fight it, but the transformation process requires resources they don't have access to from their current state. Maya leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. Every failed expedition had approached the Dragon Graveyard as a retrieval mission. They tried to take the cores by force, treating the dragons as obstacles to overcome rather than potential allies to understand. Commander, in your opinion, would a different approach have any chance of success? Rask's sensors focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. Depends on the approach. If you're planning another military assault, you'll fail like the rest of us. But if you can find a way to communicate with them, to understand what they're trying to accomplish. They trailed off. You think they might cooperate? I think they're desperate. And desperate beings sometimes make unlikely alliances. Admiral Zextheri had been listening with the focused attention that had made her legendary in the Void Fleet. Captain Chen, this information changes the parameters of your mission significantly. Are you still willing to proceed? Maya considered the question carefully. She'd volunteered to retrieve dragon cores, but the reality was far more complex than anyone had understood. She wasn't just being asked to brave an electromagnetic storm and psychic residue. She was being asked to attempt first contact with beings that existed partially outside normal reality, creatures that might be the galaxy's only hope against a plague that consumed entire star systems. Yes, she said finally. But I'll need to modify my approach. Over the next 2 days, Maya worked with a small team of specialists to prepare for a mission unlike anything in galactic history. Instead of weapons and armor, she requested organic materials, leather, wood, bone, and stone. Instead of communication devices, she wanted musical instruments and art supplies. Instead of a military transport, she asked for a simple chemical rocket that would function regardless of electromagnetic interference. The preparation drew curious observers from multiple species. Dr. Heimler of the Psychic Research Division was particularly puzzled by her selection of items. Captain, these materials have no technological sophistication whatsoever. They're barely above the level of primitive tools. That's exactly why they might work, Maya explained as she tested a simple bow made from laminated wood and synthetic sinew. The dragon's transformation process seems to disrupt complex systems. But basic materials don't have complex systems to disrupt. She also spent hours studying human music, particularly pieces that dealt with themes of cooperation, transformation, and hope. Her grandmother had been a musician, and Maya had grown up understanding that music was a form of communication that transcended language barriers. Dragons are described as having highly developed aesthetic senses, she explained to her puzzled preparation team. They created beautiful structures, harmonious ecosystems. Music might be a universal language that even transformed dragons could understand. Elder Quinlos materialized in the preparation bay during her final equipment checks. His translucent form was more solid than usual, suggesting he was investing considerable energy in this conversation. "Child of Earth," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in multiple dimensions, "you prepare for this mission as if you were attending a cultural exchange rather than a military operation." "Maybe that's what it actually is," Maya replied, carefully packing a small wooden flute alongside emergency rations and basic survival gear. "Maybe the reason everyone else has failed is that they approached it as a conflict instead of a conversation." The elder's form shimmered with what might have been approval. "There are currents in the deep that suggest your approach aligns with patterns of cosmic significance. But, be warned, transformation is not without cost. If you succeed in communicating with the transformed dragons, you may find yourself changed as well." "Changed how?" "That is not given to me to know. Only that the forces you will encounter reshape more than just matter and energy. They reshape the fundamental relationships between consciousness and reality." Maya nodded soberly. She'd suspected that success might come with unexpected consequences. But the alternative was watching the void plague consume world after world until nothing remained of galactic civilization. The launch took place at dawn on the space station's artificial day cycle. Representatives from multiple species gathered to witness what many believed would be humanity's first significant contribution to galactic affairs, even if that contribution was likely to be a glorious failure. Maya's transport was simple by galactic standards, a chemical rocket with basic life support and minimal navigation systems. It could deliver her to Dracaris Prime's surface, but the return journey would depend entirely on whatever she accomplished at the Dragon Graveyard. As the countdown proceeded, Ambassador Veltar approached the launch platform. His serpentine form was coiled in patterns that suggested reluctant respect. "Captain Shen," he said, his forked tongue tasting the air around her, "I voted against this mission because I believed it was suicide disguised as heroism. I hope very much that you prove me wrong." "So do I, Ambassador." The rocket launched with a chemical roar that was primitive by galactic standards but somehow more honest than the silent antimatter drives used by advanced civilizations. Maya felt the acceleration press her into her seat with familiar force, reminding her of humanity's long history of strapping themselves to barely controlled explosions in pursuit of exploration. The journey to Dracaris Prime took 18 hours, giving Maya time to review everything she'd learned and finalize her approach. The planet appeared in her view screen as a beautiful blue-green world surrounded by a sphere of chaotic energy that pulsed with colors that had no names in any known language. The electromagnetic storms were visible from orbit as spiraling patterns of light and force that seemed to move with intentional purpose rather than random chaos. Maya could see why advanced sensors interpreted them as hostile phenomena. But she could also see the underlying mathematical beauty in their movement, the suggestion of intelligence behind their apparently destructive patterns. Her landing site was a crystal plain 50 kilometers from the Dragon Graveyard itself, the closest point where her simple rocket could safely touch down. As she prepared to disembark, Maya took a moment to record a message for the Galactic Council, though she wasn't sure if any communication system would function well enough to transmit it. "If anyone receives this," she said to her recorder, "understand that I don't expect to return unchanged from this mission. But change isn't always loss. Sometimes it's growth. Sometimes it's the only way to save what matters most." She sealed the rocket and began walking toward the electromagnetic storm, carrying nothing but basic survival gear, simple tools, a wooden flute, and a determination to treat the unknown as a potential friend rather than a certain enemy. Behind her, the rocket's communication array managed to transmit one final signal before the growing electromagnetic interference overwhelmed its systems. It was a simple message that reached the Galactic Council just as they were beginning to fear they'd sent Maya Chen to her death. "First contact protocols initiated. Request all available xenoarchaeology and music theory databases be transmitted to backup receivers. I think we're going to need them." The electromagnetic storms swirled around the human woman as she disappeared into patterns of light and force that had claimed 3 expeditions before her. But, for the first time since the Dragon Graveyard had become a source of galactic concern, the storms seemed to move with something other than hostility. They moved with what looked almost like curiosity. The electromagnetic storms welcomed Maya like an old friend meeting a beloved relative after a long absence. What had torn through advanced sensor arrays and driven cybernetic systems into cascade failures felt to her like walking through warm rain on a summer evening. The chaotic energies that previous expeditions had described as hostile seemed to recognize something in her approach and adjusted their patterns accordingly. Maya walked for hours across crystalline plains that shifted color with each step, following pathways that appeared beneath her feet as if the planet itself was guiding her journey. The storm swirled around her in spirals that grew more complex and beautiful as she approached the heart of the dragon graveyard. She began to hear the music when she was still 10 kilometers away. It wasn't sound in any conventional sense. The music came through her bones, through the quantum vibrations in her cells, through channels of perception that humans had evolved but rarely used consciously. It was the song of matter transforming into energy and energy becoming something beyond both, a symphony of metamorphosis that spoke to every living thing capable of growth and change. The dragon graveyard itself was nothing like the desolate wasteland described in military reports. It was a garden of crystalline structures that reached toward the sky like frozen music, each formation pulsing with light that followed complex mathematical rhythms. And, scattered throughout the garden were the dragons themselves. They were not dead. They were not alive in any sense that current galactic science could measure. They existed in a state of becoming, their massive forms partially translucent, partially solid, constantly shifting between states of matter and energy and something that transcended both categories entirely. Maya approached the nearest dragon with the same careful respect she would show a sleeping tiger. The creature was enormous, easily the size of a city block, with crystalline scales that reflected light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. But there was beauty in that pain, the kind of overwhelming aesthetic experience that humans described as sublime. The dragon's head turned toward her with movements that seemed to occur outside normal spacetime. Its eyes were like looking into the heart of a star, but she met its gaze without flinching. In that moment of contact, Maya understood why previous expeditions had failed so completely. They had come with shields raised, weapons ready, minds armored against attack. But the dragons weren't attacking. They were offering something far more precious and dangerous than violence. They were offering transformation. "Hello," Maya said aloud, her voice seeming small in the vast space but carrying clearly through the crystalline structures. "I'm Maya Chen of Earth. I think we need to talk." The dragon's response came not through sound or telepathy but through direct manipulation of reality around her. Gravity fluctuated in complex patterns that her inner ear interpreted as language. Electromagnetic fields shifted with mathematical precision that her nervous system translated into concepts. Space itself curved and straightened in ways that conveyed meaning directly to her consciousness. The message was complex beyond easy translation, but its core was simple: we have been waiting for someone who could hear us. Maya pulled out her wooden flute and played a simple melody her grandmother had taught her, a folk song about rivers finding their way to the sea. The dragon's massive form shimmered with something that might have been delight, and other dragons throughout the graveyard began to respond. Their own song joined hers, not in imitation but in harmony, creating a musical conversation that spanned multiple dimensions of reality. Through the music, they told her their story. The void plague was not a disease in any conventional sense. It was entropy-given consciousness, the heat death of the universe taking active steps to accelerate its own arrival. It consumed matter and energy, but, more importantly, it consumed the connections between things, the relationships that held ecosystems together, the bonds that made civilization possible, the forces that allowed consciousness itself to exist. The dragons had recognized the threat before any other species in the galaxy. They had tried to warn others, but their methods of communication were too alien for most beings to understand. When conventional weapons and technologies proved useless against the void plague, they had made a desperate choice. They had begun a transformation that would allow them to exist partially outside reality, in dimensions where the void plague could not follow. From that state, they could potentially create a weapon against the entropic force, but they needed something they could not provide from their current existence, a bridge between their transformed state and physical reality. "We require an anchor," the dragon communicated through shifting gravitational fields that Maya's brain interpreted as gentle urgency. "A consciousness that can exist in both states simultaneously. We searched among all the species that came before you, but they were too specialized, too dependent on single methods of thought and perception. And humans are different? Humans are chaos that thinks it is order. You contain multitudes of contradictory impulses, beliefs, and capabilities. Your consciousness is naturally distributed across multiple levels of awareness. You are already partially existing in several states of reality simultaneously. Maya laughed, and the sound rang through the crystalline structures like bells. You're saying we're naturally equipped to be interdimensional bridges because we're internally inconsistent? You are equipped because you have learned to thrive on uncertainty. To find stability in constant change. To build meaning from meaninglessness. These capabilities are rare in the galaxy. The dragon extended something that was part claw, part energy beam, part mathematical equation made manifest. Maya understood instinctively that touching it would begin a transformation that would change her as fundamentally as it had changed the dragons themselves. What happens to me if I accept this? You become something new. Not human as your species currently understands the term, but not human either. You become a bridge between what is and what could be. The transformation will allow us to anchor our existence to physical reality long enough to create a weapon against the void plague. And, after that? After that, you help us build a new kind of existence. One that combines the stability of physical reality with the flexibility of the transformed state. You become the first of a new kind of being, one that can exist wherever consciousness chooses to go. Maya thought of the Galactic Council, debating endlessly while worlds fell to an entropic plague. She thought of all the species that had tried to solve the crisis through force and technology, never considering that the solution might require fundamental change rather than better weapons. She thought of humanity's greatest strength, their ability to adapt to impossible circumstances. Will I still be me? You will be more yourself than you have ever been, the dragon assured her. Transformation does not erase identity. It reveals identity. You will discover capabilities you never knew you possessed, perspectives you never imagined possible. But, the core of who you are, the essential Maya Chen, will remain. The decision should have been agonizing. She was being asked to abandon her species, her physical form, possibly her sanity, all for the chance to save a galaxy that had barely acknowledged humanity's existence. But, Maya found the choice surprisingly easy. She had volunteered for this mission because she believed humanity had something unique to offer the galaxy. Now she understood that what they offered was not technology or military might, but the willingness to become something new when something new was needed. Maya reached out and grasped the dragon's extended appendage. The transformation began immediately. Pain and ecstasy became indistinguishable as every cell in her body learned to exist in multiple states simultaneously. She felt herself expanding beyond the boundaries of her physical form while somehow becoming more concentrated in her essential self. Time became fluid. Space became negotiable. Consciousness became a tool rather than a prison. Through the expanding web of her awareness, she could perceive the void plague clearly for the first time. It was vast beyond imagination, a hunger that devoured not just matter and energy but possibility itself. It consumed the potential for growth, for change, for anything to become more than it currently was. But she could also see its weakness. The void plague was pure entropy, which made it incredibly powerful but also fundamentally limited. It could only destroy. It could not create, could not adapt, could not learn from its experiences. It was the most sophisticated thing in the universe, but it could never become more sophisticated. Now you understand, the dragons communicated as Maya's expanded consciousness joined their collective song. We cannot defeat entropy by opposing it. We defeat it by becoming something it cannot consume, conscious change itself. Together, Maya and the dragons began to weave something that had never existed before in the history of the galaxy. It was part weapon, part shield, part invitation to transformation. They created a field of directed evolution that could accelerate the development of any consciousness it touched, allowing entire civilizations to adapt and change faster than the void plague could consume them. The process took moments or millennia, depending on how one measured time from a partially extra-dimensional perspective. When it was complete, Maya found herself standing in the dragon graveyard, but also existing as a pattern of organized consciousness that could manifest anywhere in the galaxy where someone was ready to change. She was still human. She was also something that had never existed before. She was a bridge between what galactic civilization was and what it could become. The electromagnetic storms that had raged around the Dragon Graveyard for years suddenly shifted, becoming visible throughout the Dracaris Prime system as a beacon of organized light that pulsed in patterns any conscious being could interpret as a message. The transformation is available. Choose growth over stagnation. Choose change over destruction. Choose to become more than you have ever been. On Dracaris Prime's surface, Maya-chan opened eyes that could see across multiple dimensions of reality and smiled. When she spoke, her voice carried across space without need for communication devices, reaching every corner of the galaxy where consciousness existed. This is Captain Maya-chan of Earth, reporting successful first contact. The Dragon Graveyard mission is complete, but the real work is just beginning. The Void Plague can be defeated, but not through conventional means. We're offering something better than victory. We're offering evolution. She paused, looking up at stars that she could now perceive as living entities rather than distant lights. To any civilization listening, humanity extends an invitation. The Dragon's End, I have created a pathway to conscious transformation. You can become something capable of thriving in any environment, surviving any catastrophe, adapting to any challenge. The only requirement is the willingness to change. At sunrise, Maya-chan mounted the dragon that had been waiting for her throughout the transformation process. They rose together into the sky, two beings who had once been bound by the laws of physics now moving according to the deeper laws of conscious evolution. Behind them, the Dragon Graveyard had become something new, a graduation ceremony for any species ready to take the next step in their development. And, ahead of them lay a galaxy full of civilizations about to discover that their greatest enemy had given them their greatest gift. The Void Plague was still coming, but it would find no static targets to consume. Instead, it would encounter beings who could change faster than entropy could destroy, who could become new things faster than old things could die. Humanity had sent a girl to face dragons and retrieve power cores. Instead, she had become something unprecedented, a teacher showing the galaxy how to transform fear of change into the art of conscious evolution. The universe would never be the same. That was exactly the point.